Again, I'm Judy Guerin with NCSF, and I will not introduce each of the panelists because they're going to talk a little bit about themselves. But what I'd like to do is start out by having the panelists give a brief background of themselves. We're talking today about affirmative consent and college campuses. Both affirmative consent on college campuses and affirmative consent from a broader issue. And so we're going to start with Rudy to talk about his background, and I think some of them might be going back to their college days in their background.
If I could remember that long ago. So we're talking about affirmative consent on college campuses, and I guess what strikes me about the topic is that it is a really individualized and unique audience. I skipped a couple of years in school, so I went away to university and got on campus at the age of 16. Nobody knows in Michigan that the age of consent is 16. Everybody thinks it's 18. So it wasn't a very friendly time because as soon as they found out I was 16, nobody wanted to be around. I was also in the process of trying to come out as a gay person, which didn't happen until years later. The average age for coming out now is 14. I was 23 years old before I came out. The human brain doesn't reach full maturity till the age of 25. But at 17 years old, I was a fully grown-up man, and don't you try to tell me what I can do or can't do, damn it. I'm away at college, and that makes me a grown-up. A friend of mine not long ago said, no one is more opinionated than me, except for any 23-year-old. And I think that that's been my experience as I went through life, that I thought I was a grown-up. I wasn't even out yet. I was in college with all of these other people who were being treated as grown-ups, but whose brains really hadn't reached that point yet. And all of us, I assume, are dealing with the same sorts of issues I was. I don't think I was the only gay guy at the university that wasn't out. And that, you know, if somebody said, are you gay? My reaction to that was, no, and then, oh my God, what did I do? What did I say that let somebody think that I could be gay? And as a result of that, I was one of the most vocal anti-gay people in the community. Because the best way to prove that you're not gay is to be anti-gay. And that's why I think we find so many of those folks in gay bars and in public bathrooms, and you know, the president of the conversion therapy groups and that sort of thing. Because those are developmental issues. And whether I think I'm mature or not, they're going to happen to me. They also happen to college students. So that's a context that's different and that's unique. And when it comes to affirmative consent, I think we need to bear that context really in mind.
Hi, my name is Ruby Johnson. I am going to speak from the perspective of working with college students and being a visiting professor, and also an adjunct professor at a university. And so, in working with the students, I had to really get in touch and up close and personal with consent and all of the tenets that are attached to it, and also all of the assumptions that are attached to it in regards of working with those students. Additionally, just, you know, being a survivor of many things, molestation, rape, being a black woman who is in the closet. There's a lot of conversations I can have about that.
My name is Elena Gabash, and I'm going to probably bring a pretty unique perspective in that I really didn't go to college. I had about a year's worth of college education I did in the early 90s because I wanted to take some classes. But I was too busy being a hippie and running around in free lab and all that stuff. But my perspective when it comes to colleges is that I've been speaking at colleges since 1991, primarily about BDSM, also about polyamory, and now even about other things. I've been doing a lot of speaking recently. And over the years, I've begun to add more and more conversations about consent in my conversations I have when I speak to students about kink and about polyamory. And consent now is a good big chunk of every conversation I have. So it's changed. So I've been in from the perspective of somebody who's speaking to these students in a very different way than being a professor or being a fellow student?
So I'm in the trenches right now. I'm a senior at San Jose State University. I am a peer health educator on campus. I go around and talk about sex to my fellow peers, and a big part of that is consent and talking about sex and how do we get the best sex that we want, how do we get what we want, and how do we vocalize that to our partners. I'm also a domestic violence and sexual assault counselor, so I did BCA. So that comes into a lot of consent and talking about affirmative consent and also how do we get what we want. I also helped run and still kind of do help run San Jose State's Alternative Amory and Kink Union, which is a recognized student organization on campus. We deal with a lot of new, curious students that come into the club wanting to get in the scene. So part of my job as the education and outreach coordinator is to educate them about, hey, you're about to go to your first munch. Here's how to not be a dick. Teaching them about the basics of consent, and here's what you don't do. So I come at consent from many different perspectives.
I'm still Dick Cunningham, and I went to college, and it was quite a while ago, and it was interesting all day today. Lots of people talking about the difficulties that you have in perceiving some of these things when there are people who are around who embody white privilege. When I went to college, I was the poster boy for white privilege. I came from an upper middle class home. I went to I was a member of a country club. I was in a fraternity in college, not only fraternity, it was fraternity Sigma Chi, whose symbol is a white cross. It was a different era. But I still had some of these problems. There was a time when I came back to the fraternity house after a date, and I was a pretty conservative, fairly kind of straight up, not very bad acting fraternity. But I came in one night, and there was 3 guys, and they had I assumed a sex worker, and they had her on the hassock in the living room of the fraternity house, and they were gangbanging her up when she wanted to leave. One guy whacked her with a closed fist, and I broke it up, but I didn't report it. I've always felt bad about that. But the thing about my white privilege status from them, I mean, I'm with a big, what we might call a white stocking law firm. I'm not down in the trenches in terms of people that we're talking about and experiencing these things. And one of the things I find is really, really something that I have to focus on is to try not to see these things as white privilege. Try to empathize, try to put myself in the shoes of people who are in college now, people who are gender minorities. We have a daughter who began as a raging homophobe, then became a lesbian, is now non-binary, and we have a son who's gay. And it's real important for me to see things through the eyes of people who are experiencing them in a way that's very different than I experienced them. And that's what I'm going to be. But Judy and I talk on campuses a lot. I taught a course 2 years ago at Case Western. So I do have some familiarity with what's going on in campuses. And it's fascinating. And it's fascinating to see how the sexual and interpersonal relationship situation has developed in campuses that really makes it important to think about things like yes means yes, and when should it be yes means yes, and what sort of monitoring and systems do you need on campuses, but also how all of that informs us as to the way in society we may think about looking at things differently as yes means yes. So that's what I'll be here to talk about, and in this panel I'm sure I'm going to talk a lot less than folks here who are in the trenches, but I do have some perspectives.
So I'm going to say very little on this panel, but I do want to point out that we have done some speaking on college campuses. And one of the most interesting things was doing Sex Week at Yale a few years ago. We had about 150 students, and I asked the question, men and women, How many of you have had sex in the past year that you didn't? And every hand in the room went up. Every single hand in the room went up. And then in subsequent discussions with these students, you realize that there are these people who are 17 and 18 years old, many of them out of the cornfields of Iowa, grew up with all of their friends, and then they're tossed into this very artificial environment, a dormitory, and they are maybe in an Ivy League school and feel a tremendous amount of peer pressure to fit in, and also feel a tremendous amount of academic pressure not to make waves. So I am going to start with the first question. What do you think is the nature and extent of the sexual violence problem on America's campuses?
Scary.
You're on. Let's hear it.
So, various statistics that have come across, my computer screen, that 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted while they're in college, and 1 in 71 men will be sexually assaulted while they're in college. But the problem is that 80 to 95% of sexual assault on college campuses don't go reported. So this number could be astronomical, and we're just not seeing it, which is so scary to me.
Anybody else?
Anybody else want to?
Yeah.
I just was going to mention that the problem is really larger than sexual assault. The average person doesn't realize that you do not have to touch another person to assault them. If you put them in fear of an undesired touch, that's all that's required to assault them. Any undesired touch, whether it harms or not, is a battery, not just an assault. And I speak at colleges, I've taught at colleges and universities. The vast majority of students at the college level have no idea that it's possible to assault someone without touching them. And they have no idea that an undesired touch, even if I mean it affectionately, touch, it would be a battery. Most of us don't make it an issue. Most of us don't report it. Most of us don't react to it. But it is a battery. And so the problem of not reporting sexual assault is a part of a bigger problem of not reporting other things that are criminal acts that people don't understand. What I'm doing could be construed as a crime, even though I don't mean to hurt you or scare you. If I put you in fear, it's an assault.
I think the question was how. Can you repeat the question?
What do you think is the nature and extent of the sexual violence problem on American campuses?
I'm going to talk about the nature.
Okay.
I was talking previously about when I learned about the concept of consent. I didn't learn it in high school. I didn't learn it from my mom and my daddy. I didn't learn it from anyone. However, I did learn how the expectations of me being a woman, how that placed me a notch below. And I did learn that I could not voice my dismay, my dislikes, my discomfort without backlash. So there was reprisal to my expression of voice. Additionally, what I learned is that women are the temptress. And so if you are assaulted, if someone does transgress against you, there's something that you did to bring that on. Either you were dressing this way, had that on, you were giving off some aura of violence. And so the nature, I find, has not changed generationally. The underscores of it are still present, even in, with some of the 18-year-old young men that I work with. I recently was contracted to do some sexual education at a recovery house for young men. And we talked about, dating and first dates and, them being new to recovery and all of this. And I asked them, so you're going to have your first date, y'all are going to make out. So how do you know that it's going to go any further? then making out, because this is what he was talking about. And he said, well, you know, we're there, we're alone, she knows what's up, I know what's up, so it's expected. I'm like, I said, so have you ever thought about asking her? And he was like, no, you know, it's understood. And I said, so that is still some of the belief systems and some of the thought processes and social constructs that are present. It wasn't until we had that conversation that he even thought consent is something to even consider.
And I'm going to bring a little bit different perspective in that since 1991, when I started speaking in colleges to now, I've watched a shift in young people and in their attitudes and in how, the fact that we're even talking about it now. 20 years ago, we didn't talk about it. It was assumed that, you know, frat boys were going to be frat boys and all their privilege, and they were going to just bang whoever they wanted to bang, and girls were going to just put up with whatever they were going to put up with. And I've seen a shift. I've seen a shift in millennials having more consciousness. There's still issues like you were talking about. And I've seen, like, I have a 17-year-old granddaughter, and talking to her and just about how she is around sexuality and around consent. She's way more aware at 17 than I was at 17. Although I'm going to guess probably anybody here was at 17. So there is a shift. There is a better conversation that's going on. And it's still something that we need to work with. The fact, again, that we're talking about it shows that we're going in the right direction. And it's still, I think, way more prevalent than we can imagine. Your statistics are pretty scary.
I do want to piggyback. I did need to offer a little bit more of the demographic that I work with. The demographic that I work with are not necessarily any level of upper socioeconomic class. I work with people of color. I work with a lot of cultural constructs that, you know, that come into play. I work with a whole lot of power dynamics that come into play. And so entitlement and expectation are two principles that are very difficult to unravel when you have conflicting information coming at you. You have the information from your parents, which are these people of authority, from your family, from, you know, people of color are very collectivist. And then you have this person who's coming in, who's another, you know, person, you know, inherent person of authority. Who do you listen to?
I'm actually going to move into one question that I think is important that was not on the list. And so as the government has been more controlling about money, federal monies on college campuses, we now have the affirmative consent policies that are coming up at college campuses. And many states actually legally are now adopting to get funding for colleges. One of the things that comes into play is how these things are monitored, how they are dealt with on college campuses, kind of the due process thing. We'll get to that next. But also the mandatory reporting. So most universities have different types of mandatory reporting. Some universities and colleges have people who are very well trained, who are designated, who might be therapists and might be professionals in dealing with these things, who are the people who are assigned for people to go to if they have an issue. Other universities and colleges have mandatory reporting for everybody on the staff. I mean, you could work in the cafeteria and you're required to do mandatory reporting. And so one of the things that we've heard from professors is that they feel often that they're put in a position that affects their ability to have a good relationship with their students, and it also affects their sexual freedom. So, for example, if a lot of professors no longer go to bars where students are, because if they overhear somebody having a conversation about sexual assault in a bar, they're required to report it. They don't have Facebook communications with their students anymore because they don't want to see what's going on amongst the student's friends, they may be required to report it. So the mandatory reporting becomes an issue, and it's also an issue that the student has issues with. So if they go to their women's studies professor and have a conversation about it, they don't necessarily expect that that's going to go somewhere else, and that may have consequences this may come up in a context that they don't really intend it to come up with. So I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the mandatory reporting aspect of this and how you feel about it and how it's being implemented in colleges, and is it effective?
So the first thing that comes to mind is if there's a mandatory reporting, then if I'm somebody who is a victim, then I lose consent immediately, or I didn't consent for you to report it. So already I've had my consent violated, and now my consent's going to get violated again because there's mandatory reporting. I wouldn't say a word.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this would change to an even higher statistic.
Yeah, or alternatively, they may be required to tell you before you open your mouth that anything you say, I have to report up the chain, at which point you may say, gee, I gotta be somewhere else, I'm out of here.
So I'm actually, it's the term that is referred to mandatory reporting in Title IX as a responsible employee, and I work within the state as well. So I'm a responsible employee, and we were actually given training on how to confront these issues. When you think a student is about to disclose to you, what they tell us in the training is to stop them and say, before you say anything else, I need to let you know that anything you might say to me about being sexually assaulted, I do have to report to a Title IX coordinator. And we practiced it too. We did a lot of role playing, and we did actually discuss how it does prevent that power being taken away from the victim. And that's the best thing that any responsible employee can do, is to give that power back to that person and let them make the decision of whether or not they want to tell you and what they want to tell you. Because then that gives them the power to say, I just want to tell you about what happened, but they don't have to give you the name of the perpetrator. Because if there is no name to give to the Title IX coordinator, the Title IX coordinator can't get very far in the investigation. So they really do have a lot of choice and a lot of power if that responsible employee does what they're supposed to do, and if the training is done well.
And how have you seen that being implemented in general?
What effect does it have? What's your experience with people who come to you? Do they turn tail and run, or do they go through? What do they do?
So I haven't had any students come to me, but I have actually gone to the supervisor of mine, and I was kind of starting to talk about stuff, and they did a really great job of stopping me and saying, you know what, I'm a Title IX, have to report it, and I understand that. And I kept talking. And they did a really, really good job of that. I've also run into situations where they didn't do a good job of that, and they actually, it was a situation where somebody disclosed to them, and they were supposed to report, and they didn't. And it became a serious issue. And as you may be familiar with, that can get funding pulled from the school pretty quick, is some of my thoughts about that.
How have you?
Well, mind you, I haven't taught since 2013. So I don't know if things have changed since then on the campuses that I was employed. However, Texas is unique. And we also don't follow parasol. We leave it up to the discretion of the person who is receiving the information. And so, secondly, I am a licensed clinician. Therefore, my board my board requirements kind of trump a lot of things that I have going on. So when young women and men would come to me, either they were in an abusive relationship or they were experiencing some difficulties that someone would perceive as, having trauma, unless they were telling me they were going to kill themselves, someone else, or they were floridly psychotic and they could not, keep themselves safe, I was not mandated to report anything. We have other resources on our campus that I can lead a student to. We had services for counseling. Additionally, the campuses that I worked with, the security was actually the responsibility of the city. So, for example, University of Texas at Dallas, the Richardson Police Department is who are our law enforcers. The college is not placed into that position. So if something happens that they report to a professor, that professor and that student make a decision on what they want to do with the information. There is a duty to warn, and then there is a duty to inform, you know, within what I work with. So for me, though, it wasn't those necessarily the political aspects of it or the paperwork or the red tape that was the issue. It was a lot of the stigma that was attached. So my experience with teaching, now, I'm from some schools that are very student-centered. You know, the students have the voice. But I can see the implications of this, and I can also see the implications of professionals being creative. As a social worker, I'm always breaking rules because, you know, that's what we do. We lean on the side of the individual versus, you know, upholding some type of standard. Human rights is the law that I go by. But I can see how this would cause an issue for some students if they feel or if they're led to the fact that they're going to be reported for being sexually assaulted. They're going to be reoffended. They're going to be criminalized. They're going to take the risk of losing their opportunity in their education. I think it's quite a shame. But I also can see how some people think that this would increase the reporting. It's kind of like a catch-22 there.
I think it's also important to note that responsible employees are only mandated to report if they are disclosed to in the setting of their profession. So if I'm not working at San Jose State and my friend comes up and tells me that they were sexually assaulted, I'm not required to report because they came up to me as their friend, not as their tutor.
Because we met this woman from the University of Montana, and that wasn't the case with her. She was required to report it apparently wherever she could. That was one of the things that struck me as most strange, but that system was much better than yours.
And one of the universities also said that their university recommended they no longer have Facebook contact with their students because it could put them in the position of having to report.
Yeah, I mean, any kind of dual relationship is problematic. I would never, become friends with.
One last question on this. What you said there was a woman or a responsible person who did not report. What happens to the non-reporter, the person who is supposed to report but doesn't? It's mandatory. If he or she doesn't, what happens to him or her?
Their job is seriously at stake. If it comes into light that, if, say, the victim, there were consequences and the victim is like, well, I told this person, and, comes to light later to the university that no one reported it, then, that individual could be fired. Like I said, the school could have their funding pulled from the government. And, obviously the university wouldn't be very happy with the employee if they hadn't already been fired.
May I ask a question, Judy? Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a precedent that led to this legislation or this legislation? Was there a precedent? Was there something?
Title IX.
Well, I know about Title IX, but this, I guess, this broad application of it.
I think in the Violence Against Women Act, that was redone in, I believe, this is off the top of my head, in 2013, it included some very specific things that led to this. And there have been so many abuses on college campuses that universities have tried to hide. So, for example, a Yale or a Harvard has their own police force. They aren't reliant on the city police force. And so there's kind of been a tendency to almost discourage students from reporting it, and from the police forces from discouraging it to going outside to the other police forces. And because it's become so rampant, the federal government said, you're not going to get funding if you don't have these policies in place. And then the states have started to enact similar legislation. I know it's already passed in California and New York, and I think 5 or 6 other states are considering it. Do you have a legal opinion on this?
I approach, and Councilor Cunningham also approaches this in a completely different way. Because in our field, you come to us to tell us your secret, and the first thing you hear is, we have privilege. I'm not allowed to tell anybody anything you tell me. So you can share anything with me that you want to. It's completely secret. Now, there are exceptions, and generally I don't explain those to my client because I want them to talk to me. I don't tell them that if you report to me that you stole money from me, the privilege is waived and I can report you, But because the main message is to them, you can trust me not to violate your confidence. So I think that mandatory reporting was created to address the problem of many assaults being reported to teachers and counselors and never going to the police. I think it puts those people in a difficult position, especially healthcare. You on the one hand have privacy, on the other hand you have mandatory reporting. But it's just interesting to me that in the circus where the real consequences are going to come with the police and the felonies, the rule is you can say anything you want, and it's a secret. But in the circle where they're trying to get the people to go to the police and the authorities, the message is, before you tell me anything, I want you to know I may have to share it all with somebody else. So, as a communication strategy, you can draw your own conclusion about what might make that person more disclosive.
There's one other thing I want to note. There are specific individuals on college campuses that are not required to report. This includes doctors on the student health center and nurses as well, not the staff working in the student health center though, as well as any kind of mental health professionals that work in counseling and psychological services. Those are all confidential. Additionally, San Jose State is lucky enough to have a YWCA sexual assault victims advocate. They are confidential too. They're not required to report. No. It's a victims advocate that works for the YWCA. They're not required to report to Title IX nor to any police law enforcement. And we make that really widely known. These are the people that you go to that are confidential, and these are the people that are not. So that any person on the college campus will know. And if they choose to go and disclose to a teacher or to, a counselor, an academic counselor, an advisor, they should have known prior to that.
The fact that we even have this issue shows that there's a systemic problem in the universities, and that's what we need to be working for, not creating something like, mandatory reporting.
Yes.
I have a follow-up for Cassie. Functionally, how does it work, since some of the people in the health center are not obligated to report, and some of them are obligated to report? How do students navigate knowing who it is that they're reporting to and what their obligations may or may not be?
So there's a very clear distinction in the language that's used when the information is given to the students. So any doctors or nurses, so any person that is giving them actual medical services are not required to report. Any of the staff, so the people at the desk that makes the appointments, stuff like that, they are required to report.
And the students do have an opportunity to be in a room where they are only being there with people who are not obligated to report. Okay.
So it's unclear to me that once in this new order, someone reports something, it goes up so far. But now is this, like we've seen in the military and other places and at a lot of universities, a way for the university to cover its ass and not let it go further, or are they mandated to go to local law enforcement?
That's exactly what mandatory reporting was intended to fix. Exactly.
Okay.
But there is one thing, and Ruby and I were discussing this. I don't know how much at all of this happened. Let's suppose that you go through the mandatory, you're a victim. Reported to a mandatory reporting person. Goes up. You enter into a formal or informal process in the university, and presumably the party, the assaulting party, agrees to go through that process too. Okay, so you get, let's say you get halfway through the process. Let's suppose the victim now has, the complainant now says, damn it, I'm not happy with this process. I'm going to go to the police. As far as I know, unless there's some special statutory provision that's been enacted in that state, police can come to the university and say, I want everything you've got in your process. You have to give it to us so we can use it in prosecution, because there is no privilege that I know.
I believe that. The Title IX coordinator that ultimately gets the information from any responsible employee is not required to send it to law enforcement on their own. Once they get it, they don't have to, send it to the police.
Well, I'm missing who gets.
So what happens
The
when
employee finds out about an assault, even if someone didn't come and tell them. They might have heard a rumor, seen it on Facebook. At that point, they go to someone else in the university and report it.
Right, there's a specific person called the Title IX coordinator who is in charge of collecting the information and then performing an investigation into the assault.
But I think what Jim was
And then when
talking
does it
about
go?
is a situation where the Title IX process begins, and during it, the victim says, wait a minute, I want to go to the police. And the university may have gotten a lot of, the defendant, the person who did it, may have made a lot of statements and admissions thinking, well, this is just here, the police aren't going to find out about it. And without some kind of protection, that could end up being unfair on both sides.
Also, what I'm thinking about is, the one university that I was at, there was a huge disproportionate amount of students who were not documented. And so when they would come to me and talk to me, I would always have to be creative with how I gave them referral sources, because in Texas you can receive education and not necessarily be a documented citizen. And so I could see how this could put a barrier even further for those students. We got Harvard, we got Yale, but there are some people who are a big piece of this population that are always in a position of covering, hiding. That threat is a huge barrier. So we not only have the emotional and mental barrier, now we're going to also add, am I being, is there surveillance going on here? Is everything that I say being subject to be reported? Can I be free and in an open space? Or the person over here may hear me, then they have to report it. So I just see a culture of fear being even more important.
Even they are more likely to be victims.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of becomes
Yeah.
a snowball.
Yeah.
Well, that was all, we're only on the second question. Let me move to the third question. What acts should require affirmative consent? Penetration at one extreme, casual touching at the other extreme. To what extent are non-physical acts, verbal abuse, bullying, harassment, offensive language, unsafe?
As far as physical acts, I think everything should require affirmative consent.
I mean, even for, I pat you on your butt.
Yeah.
Okay.
As an example, I was actually at a different panel, and somebody came up to me afterwards, and I was actually wearing the same necklace. They're a former partner of mine whom I ended the relationship with. They came up to me and they said hi, and they were talking, and they said, "Oh, nice necklace," and they just reached out and touched it. And I was incredibly uncomfortable because they had no reason to touch my necklace, and they did not ask to do so. So I am personally of the opinion that if you want to touch my necklace, you want to touch my hair, you want to touch my jacket, you can touch my ass. Ask me.
I'm in total agreement. I had a lady walk up to me one time, and she had her kids with her, just on the street. She goes, "Wow, can I look at your tattoos?" And I went like this, let her look, and she reached up and moved my hair and touched it. Right? And I was like, what? So yeah, any physical touch, I think needs further consent.
I'm hypersensitive to space and people actually being a part of conversations, because I'm often part of conversations. Physical, I can concur, I agree. But the in sight, in hearing, it's assumed that I want to be a part of your conversation on race relations in America as the only token Black person. Don't make that freaking, I'm getting a little passionate. Don't make that assumption that I want to be a part of your conversation. You are not entitled to my experience. You are not entitled to expect that my experience is going to be shared with you. That's a risk. I'm Casey today. It was taken away from me a long time ago, but today I am empowered. Additionally, I'm also aware of the space that I am when I'm in public. There has been conversations with me sitting in a restaurant, and people have been talking about, using very inflammatory language about many different populations. Is there decorum? Is that an assault upon my person? I did not consent to that. So I can remove myself, but not everybody knows that they can remove themselves. Not everybody knows that there is a choice in that. Not everybody knows that, you don't have to, out of obligation or out of, I don't want to be rude, consent to things that are within your power not to. But that is something that is taught, and that is something that is mimicked, modeled by society. There is so much centered around this, because physical assault, let me just ask the panel. Have y'all ever touched anybody's hair without asking them?
Nothing hurt at all.
Have you ever touched anybody?
Yeah. A long time ago, I had, I confess, I'm sorry.
Yeah. People walk up to me with my short sleeves and go, "Oh my God, this skin is so soft. I didn't know it was that soft." I'm like, bitch, get your hands off me. Oh, I do.
That's how we do it.
I'm sorry about my language.
So I'm a big believer of free speech. I mean, that's something that I think is really important. And with free speech comes responsibility. And so, I mean, you want to stand out in the street corner and say racial epithets, you want to say something, I have a right to come up to you and say, shut the fuck up. Right? That's where it's at. But not everybody knows they can do that. So empowering people to be fully self-expressed. I believe in free speech, and so it gets really touchier when we come to the verbal side of what you can send them out.
On the other hand, it would have the advantage, maybe we can get rid of a couple of presidential candidates this year.
Oh.
There are a couple of legal principles that would probably apply. In our normal day-to-day interaction, nonverbal communication, tone, and so forth, sometimes we touch another person without getting affirmative consent. It's probably better that we get it, because the law does say any undesired touching is a battery. Now, sometimes a person hasn't communicated that the touching is undesired. In 1944, there was a Harvard Law Review article where the article argued for a new doctrine called the no harm in asking doctrine. Because the law was, if I as a man went up to a female and said, "Hey, you want to come back to my place and have sex?" I was saying she was a prostitute and she could sue me. The law said, no, when it comes to speech, there's no harm in asking. That applies, I've used it in cases with gay men, where a gay man would approach an undercover cop and say, "You want to have sex?" And, if the person says no and you persist, you've definitely crossed the line and you're going to get prosecuted. But there's no harm in asking You make the ask, the person says no, and you leave it. You haven't done anything wrong. The other thing doctrine is a very ancient legal equitable thing, de minimis non leget lex. It's Latin. There's an old limerick. There once was a lawyer named Rex with minuscule organs of sex. When arrested for indecent exposure, Rex said with complete composure, de minimis non leget lex, which means the law will not concern itself with trifles, with small things. To the extent that I may have touched someone because the nonverbal interaction indicated there was consent and I misinterpreted, and they then communicate to me they didn't want to be touched. If I touched them again, I'd expect them to change. But if I leave it at that point, then I would expect that maxim to apply. And if the person wanted to take action, I would say, but it was minimal. There was no harm. Warning, though, that's happened lots of times in workplaces, and the argument's not going to get you out of jail. If the person you touched really wants to push it, de minimis non leget lex isn't going to work for you. So really, affirmative consent on touching, although it's not what I practice properly, is really the better way to go.
And what about, what are the differences between the issue of affirmative consent on campuses and the issue of affirmative consent generally?
There should be.
Shouldn't be at all. I think that we create this false community of youth, mostly youth, not everybody in colleges and universities are young, but most of it's youth. But it's a false community. There's this idea that we're all in it together. We do this with the kinky community, folks on that. But, we create this false community, so we all expect to have the same morals, the same belief system, the same everything, and we don't. I'm a firm believer that part of the big problem that we're having is that we don't start at a young enough age teaching this. We should be teaching our babies about consent. These things should be from the get-go, so that we won't have these problems in the
They're
future.
taught. Our babies are taught, when we walk up to the lady and the lady says, oh, cute little baby, and the child moves away. Mama says, don't be mean to the
That's
lady.
right.
Let her hug you.
Oh, it's even worse. Like grandma says, give me a kiss, and the kid says, I don't want to kiss grandma. And you better kiss grandma. So we no, it's really important. We need to start at a young age so that these issues will go away eventually. But we have created this by putting all these young people together and saying this is how you're going to behave. And so I think it's probably more, maybe not more prevalent, but more noticed. Just talked about more. And again, it's starting the conversation, which I'm very happy about.
Let me just ask you this way, though. Is there any line to be drawn? And should the line be drawn differently for college campuses and the general public for older adults? Is there any line to be drawn between the type of action, sexual contact, sexual assault, whatever, that warrants a certain level of penalties and the type that doesn't?
No.
No.
If these kids want to do adult things, they're going to be treated like adults. And if they want to engage in sex, they should have basic sexual communication down. I think the difference...
Tapping on the shoulder would have the same potential penalty as grabbing your breast.
Well, like any situation, sexual assault is treated on a sliding scale, basically, of how severe. So, if you assault somebody in that you tap their shoulder versus if you assault somebody by violently raping them, those are going to be treated differently in a court of law and will be treated differently on a college campus.
Yeah, I asked that question specifically. The American Law Institute is wrestling with all of this stuff on all of the issues on campus. And the one thing they're having trouble doing is drawing that line. Where is the degree of intrusiveness sufficient to warrant mandatory reporting, to warrant expulsion, to stuff like that? They have a lot, and indeed they don't talk much about that. Clearly, if you get penetration, clearly if you get an assault that causes injury in a significant amount. But you get down into the lower sort of stuff, they're having lots of trouble with that. And your view is all of it should be, it may be a little different level of penalty, but all of it should be penalized.
You know, one of the issues that when I was doing some studying, one of the issues is that there is no continuity in definition. And so that was the difficulty with getting accurate reporting to the federal government, because each state had a different definition of what a hate crime is, what sexual assault is, etc. So, and breaking it down even further, each county has a different definition. So in Texas, we have a definition of what sexual assault is, which involves the penetration, the touch, the grazing of something or someone that it is considered sexual in nature and is of their sexual organs.
The characteristic.
So, we have a queer community. So we have individuals, trans individuals, some patch, some don't, some whatever. So we had an individual who took it upon themselves to grab a trans male. And that person wanted to file sexual assault charges. They wouldn't consider it. So when we talk about definition,
Is that on the theory that wasn't sexual in nature for some reason?
Because it was a prosthetic, right?
yeah.
Again, this goes back to the fact that there needs to be something that people, like, across the board definition,
Yes.
which is gonna take forever.
So, are you familiar with Antioch University?
Sure.
A couple decades ago, it was a hypersexualized campus, and they came up with a protocol so they could handle this, and it was that slowly escalate, and it got lampooned on Saturday Night Live. You can look up the episodes. You know, it was the, may I grab your leg, may I grab your buttocks, and it was great fun, and this was a couple decades ago. Everyone thought it was being absurd over the top. But now hearing discussions today, you know, I think maybe they had it more right than we think. And hearing about currently things on campus, kids come to campus, they're held to the same responsibilities as adults for doing sexual things. Maybe they should have a protocol like that and be taught, you know, escalate and be overly critical about each piece along the way, because while it might be okay to touch the shoulder, maybe it's not to touch the breast or the thigh or the butt or the vagina. I'm just kind of interested in your comments on that.
So when you asked that question, as far as whether or not college students should be held to the same standards, yeah. The difference between college students and the rest of the population is that we have fish in a barrel that we can educate. Whereas after they go off to college, it's going to be a lot harder to get them that information.
Get them now.
So yeah, get them now. That's the difference, is that I can go into a class with 30 students and give math education, and they will all, if I do my job, walk out knowing the definition of consent and how to get it.
Yes.
Whereas if I'm trying to go one by one to every post-grad in the career world, it's going to take me a lot longer.
I just wrote down really smart fish at San Jose.
That is exactly why I gladly speak at the schools, whether they pay me or not. For that exact reason, is that every time I get in front of a class of either 30 or 500, depending on where I'm speaking, I get to give this information out. I got to tell you this, an interesting story that applies to this. In a week, a little over a week, I'm going to be speaking with two of my friends about slut shaming at South College, the college here in Seattle. And they contacted us. They want us. We're going to do a 3-hour class about slut shaming, and we were writing up the write-up about it. And the woman who connected with us, she's somebody who's been to our other workshops that we do and stuff. She said, she goes, I hate to tell you this, but you can't put the word slut in the title. I know. So we're doing a workshop on slut shaming, but we can't put the word. That's an awful word. I'm just kidding. Yeah, you know, and that really comes down to our whole sexual shame society that we have. Yeah, which is why we're having these conversations when we have these issues and when we have it, is because we don't bring it out into the light. We keep it under the dark. We hide it all the time. And I can't say the word slut in a title of a class that I'm teaching about slut shaming. It's funny, but it's really fucked up. It's really sad.
There have been some cases recently where universities have been judged not to do due process when students have been expelled and appealed. So how do you all feel we're doing with this, and what could we do from an activist standpoint to improve this? We talked about let's educate the fish in the barrel, which is great. Any other thoughts on this?
I think that multidisciplinary meetings like this are exactly the key, because we all approach it from a different angle and a different viewpoint. I think that the education that's going on just needs to be done more and more effectively, and perhaps expand into some of the concepts like being able to assault someone without touching them. There's basic law that people don't get taught, even at the college level, that they really need to be taught.
I think when we're talking about due process, we can educate the students all we want, but the students ultimately are not the ones that are making the decisions. It's the 40, 50, 60-year-old administrators who are still holding these myths about sexual assault. And that's where it becomes really difficult, because we have all of these college students standing up and saying, this is not okay. We should not be treated like this. The way that you handle Title IX issues is not okay. But unless the attitudes of the administration, the people running the schools, the government officials changes, it's, no matter how many students are yelling, it's not going to change, because they're not going to think
You're saying they're not doing it okay in terms of not being sufficiently sympathetic to or doing enough for victims of the whatever act. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the schools that take it on, they're the judge and jury, and the schools can't be the judge and jury, especially when there are people that have not been educated, as you were saying. So the education shouldn't go just to the students. More likely, it should be going to the administrative process. So there's something for us to do.
Yeah, well, the government is placing the burden on the administration to do it, not that they're doing it effectively.
So maybe the government should have different standards as to how the administration takes care of that. Because if the government sets out the policies under which they evaluate sexual assault cases, then the school has to do it, or else they lose their funding.
Right.
You know, Title IV, which is the child welfare funding, they actually have evolved into that. For you to receive federal funding, you have to do a certain amount of hours for cultural competency, that's what they call it, and you have to do it 3 hours, and it has to look like this and include this. So if we can take that one policy and compare it to another one, you know, and we have the ability to do it. One of the things that I learned when I was in school is that the policies dictate the morals, values, and reflections of the persons in power.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about who's in power, the 40, 50,
Yeah.
if you think about who's in power, that makes sense that the policies look like this. You know, if we can get a more of a collaborative approach with this, you know, the people who the policies are actually impacting, and that's where the grassroots come from. You know, what are we doing in the trenches to do it? Are we giving free, you know, trainings to our police department, to our schools, to the teachers and stuff like that? Are we actually doing that? You know, I go and I say, because Susan trained me to do a consent training. And so I go to the high schools and say, hey, I want to do this. And they said, well, we have to get the parents' permission to talk about that topic. I said, don't you already talk about abstinence and all of that? You already said no means no, right? You know, so let's talk about yes means yes, you know, now. And so, but I get laughed at. But that, to me, one of the issues.
There's
Judy?
one of those issues is exactly that, is getting those trainings out there. I was involved with a group back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that we were going to be going and teaching about queer, LGBT issues, etc., to the police force, including also some kinky stuff, and we never made it. We got like, yeah, we're going to let you do it, yeah, we're going to let you do it, and we never made it. That said, I did get to speak and do some education for a while to health workers and stuff about sexuality. So I've had some opportunities, but it's really hard to get the powers that be to sit down and listen to you and actually want to hear what you have to say. And I would love to speak in high schools, by the way.
Let me just make a quick comment and then I'll give the two questions. You have something.
I started out by talking about the Declaration of Independence and consent there as being foundational for what we live today. 150 years ago in this country, if you were a black female, it was perfectly legal for your white owner to rape you and sell your children. They were slaves too. We live in a world where we're having this conversation, but out there in other parts of the world, that's reality today. There are women today that for religious reasons are being put into slavery and raped, and their children are the property of their rapists and subject to being sold. So that's just a different perspective, and it's part of the reason why I'm here and why I'm so glad you're all here, because we live in a world where this is still going on. And it wasn't just yesterday that it was going on here in this country. So our job is, I'm glad the internet's watching, because our job goes beyond Seattle.
So, two questions.
So I guess what I'm hearing in the whole consent issue is if you go through the consent process and then you can have sex and you haven't raped someone, I guess. And I don't know if I'm going to say this properly, but in my mind, essentially that's a fairly low bar for creating a loving, nurturing relationship of some sort. And so what isn't being taught so much is what you want to use sex for, which is bonding, and no, beyond just having a few minutes of pleasure, to have bonding, and sex helps support your physical health and your emotional health, and some people think their spiritual well-being. So I guess that's, to me, what's dropped out of all the sex education.
Well, but it's also pretty relevant to the discussion about college, because frankly, when I was in college, bonding and that sort of thing wasn't my first priority when it came to sex. And conversely, I think that there are times in our lives when looking for that person to be in love with, or meeting someone, and you think you're in love, you ask for consent to breathe, let alone, do what I mean, because you're motivated by love. So the motivation changes, at least for us men, over time. Sometimes it
Can I chip in on that? Because I think there's another thing, a little different thing that's absolutely central in all of this that is kind of left out of this discussion, and in some ways doesn't fit in this discussion, but always seemed to me, and actually what I was taught as a young man, and even in my fraternity was taught, is that sex is a very important interpersonal thing. And you're not, except for one particular kind of sex, doing it alone. And the great Rodney Dangerfield line up, sex is so terrifying. The first time I had sex, I was really scared. It was dark and I was all alone. But I was always taught that sex has emotional and spiritual as well as physical consequences for both of the parties involved in it. And what's really important when you practice sex in some way is that you have an understanding and an empathy for the other person's interests, and that should guide how you comport yourself, and consent is a very central part of that. That's the way I would kind of put it. But anyway,
so if I can maybe restate what I was trying to say in a way. I mean, in our culture, there's a huge dominant, given, the Southern Baptists even explicitly saying women should submit to their husbands. There's a huge element of women are paid for sex. Every kiss begins with K's, the jewelry. You give her diamonds and you get sex. There's a huge trope in our culture about that.
Yeah.
So, and all human relationships are transactional. I mean, just presumably my partner gets something from me and I get something from them. But what I want to suggest is that rather than making it this sort of transactional thing, consent, the problem that our discussion of consent is trying to address, which is not forcing ourselves on other people, is to ask them, rather than can I do this to you, in other words, can I gratify myself by doing something, how can you gratify yourself by what you want to do with me? In other words, what is it that you want to do? And get someone to tell you from a positive perspective what it is they want.
Well,
Just a minute, are we out of time?
No, you get 10 minutes.
Okay.
You're right. Less than that. You're close.
Any more questions?
There's a couple things I want to address really quickly. One, I think that sexual education today, and the kind of sexual education that I give, does address how to get what you want in sex. Two, I personally don't believe there's anything wrong with transactional sex. I mean, obviously not don't give someone diamonds and expect sex, but if both of you just want to get off and you both agree on that, we're just gonna fuck and then you're gonna leave, fine. That's cool. But as long as that's understood between two people. I don't personally think that sex has to be a big emotional, physical, spiritual, I'm gonna invest my entire life in you. And that's a really commonly held attitude on college campuses. So one of the things that we talk about is, what do you want out of sex? And sometimes it's just to feel good. As long as both partners can agree on that, then great. Go for it and make sure you use the condom.
I think we have Dan back here.
And she had a question.
So a lot of this, and it was mentioned once in the keynote, was with the prevalence of alcohol and drugs and things, and I don't know if there's a question buried in there, but on college campuses, some people, just saying in your speeches in the classes people give, you can't do it if you're under the influence, that'll turn a lot of people off, because they're like, what, it's the only way I get sex, how do you bridge the gap of that? I don't.
That's a gap that can't be bridged. The law is clear. If a person's inebriated or high, they can't give consent.
But I'm saying, how do you get it through to people in a way that they will be receptive and things will actually change? I mean, I know a lot of people that whenever they have parties, they're like, okay, we're breaking out the booze. If you fancy anybody, make sure that you go talk to them now, because everything else is null and void and yada yada. And so, but getting people to do that for themselves, they just don't.
Consent that's obtained while the person is competent, and it says that, we're going to get drunk and then we're going to do this, would be perfectly valid. But if you bring the issue up after the person's impaired, you got a problem.
Okay, that's the legal. So,
And that's what I'm hoping, and that's what I want. But I don't want to tell people that, and you can't do a thing.
you want to uncouple intoxication with sexual intimacy, right? And so, for a lot of people, they use the liquid lubricant, whatever it is, to ease the anxiety of interaction. And there's such a stigma attached to being sexually open and just wanting to, be primal and etc., that some people just need a little bit of something to give them the confidence. There's a lot of, that's what I hear a lot of. If I get a couple of beers, I have the confidence of blah, 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 blah. So that's one of the things that I talk about with young adults in meeting with them. What are you looking for within that particular substance? What is the reason that you need that? Now, mind you, I know that's a very lofty idea, but that's one of the things that maybe you can consider, go back and educating your campus.
Because it seems like walking up to a group of people and saying, I know you don't like this, but if you ever put a drop of booze in you, all of the stuff that's happening at those parties is de facto sexual assault, and everybody was like, well, hell it is. And I don't have a mental plan or have seen one that is good enough
Straight has one.
No.
it has to
It
be
goes back,
I think
it goes back to starting young and educating young so that we don't feel the shame and the anxiety. I look back at my youth. I was a hard drinker and a heavy drug user. I was pretty much a wild little hippie chick, right? Now, who raped who? I had sex that people would look at now and go, that was not consensual. And yet, I was maybe not as drunk as the person I was having sex with. Might have been, who knows? We were both really high and really drunk, and I did this over and over again. So I was very active. But I do, that's the thing, is that when you go to the letter of the law, yeah, I committed all kinds of crimes besides the drugs. And I had consensual sex, consensual drunken sex, consensual high sex. And yet, when we talk about this, I'm not supposed to be able to consent. It's a big dilemma that we have, and I see this when I talk to young people too. The same thing comes up. Well, we both got drunk. We both had a good time.
I think that one of the perceptions of drinking turning into sex is that it takes away the need for having that conversation about what you want to do. Because frequently it happens that we're all drinking, or they're all drinking, because legally they're and they're in a party. One girl is grinding up against a guy, and that means that they want to fuck. They're going to go up after they've had a couple more drinks, and they're going to have sex. And it takes away from that conversation of like, hey, do you want to have sex? Because it's fueled by alcohol. So I think that demonstrating the need and the value in still having that conversation, even if you're drinking, will kind of then be able to demonstrate, hey, even if you take away the alcohol and then you still have that conversation, you're still going to have good sex. In fact, you might have better sex because you can keep it up. So I think that part of it is demonstrating the value in actually having some kind of basic sexual communication, even before you decide to drink.
Alina introduced me to a whole new thing a second ago when she mentioned the leather of the law. I never heard of it.
I took a journal
So, any final comments? We would love to have all of you participate and give us some feedback on what you think MTSF could do regarding this issue on college campuses. I mean, we do some education and things on college campuses, but what could we do to improve that?
If I can ask one other quick question, is there must be some campuses that are doing better than others, and no offense to Dick, but do you think the fraternity culture exacerbates sexual violence?
So I personally think that San Jose State generally does a really great job. We teach primary prevention, bystander intervention, self-defense, and we send the message that it is not don't get raped, it is don't rape.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, San Jose State University also has a very vibrant Greek life. Some fraternities are better than others. One of the unfortunate things that I've come across, and I can't attest to whether or not San Jose State has this problem, but there is one fraternity specifically, Sigma Alpha Epsilon, SAE, sexual assault expected, as it's known across national chapters. It probably has one of the worst reputations. If you look it up on Urban Dictionary, it is there.
What grade again?
Sigma Alpha Epsilon.
Sigma Alpha Epsilon, southern-based fraternity that's spread across the country.
Yeah. So there are definitely fraternities that aren't great at promoting the message that some college campuses promote.
When I went through fraternity rush at George Washington University, SAE would take the guys they were interested in pledging to the fraternity. They'd take them up to a whorehouse around 14th Street. And that would
And how they were figuring out who fit.
Yeah. That would keep the gay guys out. Fancy to take a whorehouse.
I think I think that's last.
Okay. Well, you've asked for feedback about what NCSF could do. In the King community, we have a vibrant tradition of teaching negotiation. We're really, really good at developing those kind of workshops and talks. I would like to see NCSF tailor those to college campuses, remove the BDSM specifics of it, and teach this concept of negotiation in the wider realm of sexual behavior. I think it's just as valuable out there as it is within the King community.
When I speak at schools now, I talk about safe words, and I like them when I said, you know what, you don't have to be kinky to use a safe word. Safe word is a word that withdraws consent immediately. Have safe words. Use safe calls. I use a lot of that kind of stuff when I do sex talks and stuff. I think it's important.
And just disagreeing on what acts you want to do. Like,
Yes.
what are you up for? What are you into? How do you want this to go down? Do you want to spend the night? Are we going to be boyfriend and girlfriend? Like, those are all things that you can talk about, and it's part of negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. That is one of the things that we cover. And a lot of students find it really valuable because many students have never been told that they can ask for and get what they want. Because a lot of the time, and Tristan was talking about this, it's always just a no list. It's never a yes list. So I think providing that space to advocate for oneself and one's own pleasure is really important.
Thank you. This was I learned a lot. Thank you. Thank you so much.